In 1973, a federal wiretap was running in a Harlem apartment on 116th Street. A man named Frank Lucas picked up the phone and said, "I need 50 birds. Send them through the back door before the parade starts." The FBI agent listening wrote in his notebook, "Birds, back door, parade." He had no idea Frank Lucas had just ordered 50 kilos of pure heroin to be smuggled through JFK Airport before the next federal sweep. For 40 years, black gangsters built an underground language right under the noses of the FBI. They moved billions of dollars in product. They ordered hits on phones the federal government was actively monitoring. They flipped territories using words that sounded like normal conversation. And the FBI couldn't crack the code. Number 14 on this list was so dangerous that saying it on a wiretap could put a hit on your own family within 24 hours. And number 3 was the word that finally brought down Frank Lucas's empire, but only after a federal informant accidentally said it to the wrong person. Subscribe before we start, because after this video, you will never hear an old black man say, "Tomorrow, the same way again." 20 secret words, counting down from 20 to 1. The word at number 1 buried more federal cases than any other code in American history. Let's go. Number 20, birds. In 1971, Frank Lucas was sitting in a Harlem barbershop on 125th Street when his cousin walked in and said one word, "birds." Lucas paid his barber, walked outside, and got in a Cadillac that drove him to JFK Airport. Within 6 hours, 100 kilos of heroin sewn into the coffins of dead American soldiers from Vietnam were sitting in a warehouse in the Bronx. Birds meant kilos, not just any kilos, pure product ready to move. The word came from the airfield. Birds fly, birds disappear, birds go places. By 1973, every black drug crew from Harlem to Detroit to Oakland used the word. The FBI heard birds in over 10,000 wiretap conversations and assumed they were investigating an exotic pet smuggling ring. Today's Gen Z says bricks, but birds was the original, and it built the Frank Lucas empire before the FBI ever learned what it meant. Number 19, people. In 1978, a federal prosecutor in New Jersey sat across from a wiretap technician and asked one question: "Why does every drug dealer have so many relatives?" The technician laughed. Then he explained, people meant product. A 22-year-old dealer in Newark could say, "My people are coming in tonight," on a tapped line, and the FBI couldn't get a warrant, because legally it sounded like he was talking about family. "My people are tired" meant the product was overcut, weak. "My people are clean" meant the product was pure, uncut. "My people are scared" meant the supplier was getting cold feet on a deal. For 15 years, the FBI heard the word people in tens of thousands of recorded calls and couldn't get a single conviction off of it. Try explaining to a federal judge that "my people are coming" should justify a no-knock raid. The genius of the word was that it was invisible, and the FBI never found a way around it. Number 18, work. In 1985, a federal agent named Robert Sullivan was sitting in a surveillance van in East Detroit, watching a 19-year-old kid named Dwayne walk to a payphone. Dwayne dropped a quarter in. He said 3 words into the receiver, then hung up. The recording captured the words, "I got work." Sullivan wrote in his report that Dwayne had announced he found employment. 3 days later, 30 kilos of crack moved through the Brewster Douglas projects. Work was the most common black gangster code word for drugs from the 1960s through the 1990s. The brilliance was its ordinariness. Every black man in America had to go to work. Every kid was asked if he had work. The word disappeared into the language like water into sand. When the DEA finally cracked the meaning in the late 1980s, dealers just added modifiers. Day work meant powder cocaine. Night work meant crack. Long work meant heroin. Easy work meant a kilo that was already cut and ready to flip. The FBI spent the entire crack era playing catch up with one word. Number 17, the joint. In 1962, a Harlem hustler named Bumpy Johnson was finishing a 10-year sentence at Alcatraz when he wrote in a letter to his wife, "I'll be out of the joint by spring. The federal censor who read the letter approved it. He thought joint meant the prison itself, common enough slang. He was right about that, but he missed the deeper meaning. The joint was where you went when you got caught. Federal prison, Marion, Leavenworth, Atlanta, Lewisburg. By the 1970s, every black hustler in America used the phrase to refer to federal time specifically. Not state prison, not county jail. The federal joint. When federal agents heard wiretap conversations about someone going to the joint, they thought it meant a bar or a club. Black men were going to the joint for federal sentences for over a decade before the FBI built a glossary for it. Today's young men say the feds. But the joint was the original, and it was earned by the men who survived it. Number 16, Ghost. In 1988, a Brooklyn federal informant named Anthony Walker was found in the trunk of a Cadillac on Atlantic Avenue. He had been missing for 11 days. 48 hours before he disappeared, the FBI captured this wiretap sentence on his handler's line. "We gotta ghost him before Tuesday." The agents on the case assumed it meant Anthony was going into the witness protection program. He was, but not the kind they were preparing. Ghost had 3 meanings depending on context, and that is exactly why it survived. To ghost could mean go into hiding. It could mean make money disappear before the IRS found it. It could mean kill a federal witness before he testified. The FBI captured hundreds of ghost conversations on wiretaps in the 1980s. They could not prosecute any of them because they could not prove which meaning was being used in any specific call. By the time prosecutors figured out which ghost meant murder, the bodies were already in the trunks of Cadillacs across 3 boroughs. Number 15, Riverside. In 1979, an FBI surveillance team spent 6 weeks staking out a parking lot near Riverside Drive in Manhattan. They had wiretap evidence that a major heroin deal would happen there. Their orders were simple: watch, photograph, and wait for the meat. Nothing ever happened. While the agents froze in their van eating cold pastrami sandwiches, the actual meeting took place in a warehouse in Long Island City, 8 miles away. Riverside wasn't a place, it was the code that meant the place we agreed on yesterday. Black crews would change the meeting location daily. Yesterday, Riverside was a McDonald's parking lot in Queens. Today, Riverside was a barbershop on Linden Boulevard. Tomorrow, Riverside was a warehouse in Newark. The FBI burned through millions of dollars in surveillance hours staking out a street that meant nothing. The crews were 3 boroughs away every time. Number 14, Ant. We've reached number 14. Here's why saying this word on the wrong wiretap could put a hit on your own family within 24 hours. In 1984, a 19-year-old dealer in the Bronx named Marcus answered his apartment phone and said one sentence to his lieutenant: "My aunt is coming Friday." His actual aunt, a 62-year-old retired nurse named Doris, was murdered Saturday morning. She was shot through her kitchen window while making coffee. The FBI had captured the wiretap. They thought the word aunt meant his aunt. They put surveillance on Doris instead of on the supplier. The Italian mafia, who also knew the code, intercepted the same call and got there first. Aunt meant your supplier, the connect, the wholesaler. The Black Gangster code book had an entire family vocabulary. Aunt meant your wholesaler. Cousin meant a buyer. Brother meant a partner. Grandma meant the matriarch holding the cash safe, usually a real grandmother in someone's family. Uncle meant a corrupt cop on your payroll. When the code worked, the FBI could not subpoena every aunt and cousin in Black America. When the code failed, real aunts and cousins died because the wrong people heard the wrong call. After Doris died, Marcus never used the word aunt again. He developed his own family code that nobody ever cracked. He is still alive today. Doris is not. Number 13, Elevator. In 1986, a wholesaler in Detroit named Big Mike Jenkins sold 5 kilos to a younger dealer named Reggie for $90,000. The deal was agreed on Thursday. On Friday morning, when Reggie arrived with the cash, Big Mike said the price had jumped to $110,000. Reggie left without the product and went straight to a phone booth on Gratiot Avenue. He made one call. He said 3 words. Mike elevated me. Big Mike Jenkins was found dead in his car outside the Lafayette Coney Island restaurant 8 days later. Elevator meant raising the price after a deal was already locked in. It was the worst insult in the Detroit crack era, short of stealing or snitching. Elevatoring someone was a betrayal of the unwritten code that made the whole drug economy function. The word spread from Detroit to Compton, Atlanta, and Miami by 1988. Federal agents on wiretaps heard the word elevator hundreds of times. They thought dealers were complaining about building maintenance. They were actually marking each other for death. Number 12, fish. In 1989, a 32-year-old man named Calvin Reed walked into the federal prison yard at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania for the first time. Within an hour, an older black inmate sitting on a bench leaned over to his neighbor and said one word, fish. Calvin was a federal informant wearing a wire. He had been planted in the prison to gather evidence on a major drug conspiracy. He was dead within 6 days, stabbed in the laundry room. The wire was never recovered. Inside federal prison, fish meant a new inmate, fresh, easily caught, easily flipped by the FBI. On the streets, fish meant a snitch who was wearing a wire, but had not been identified yet. The double meaning saved hundreds of lives. When a black inmate in prison heard fish on the block, he knew to stay silent, because federal informants were among them. The FBI spent 2 decades trying to figure out why so many of their plants were being identified within hours of arriving at federal facilities. They never realized one word was killing their entire informant program. Number 11, church. In 1981, federal agents in Baltimore stormed a warehouse in the Sandtown neighborhood expecting to seize $4 million in heroin and arrest a major distributor named Marcus Big Time Pope. They found an empty warehouse. They were convinced their intelligence was wrong. What they did not know is that the actual stash, over $7 million in cash and 18 kilos of heroin, was sitting in the basement of New Hope Baptist Church 3 blocks away. The pastor's brother was Marcus Pope's bookkeeper. The word church meant a safe house. Sometimes a real church, sometimes a regular house, but always somewhere the FBI was historically reluctant to surveil because of the political fallout from spying on black religious institutions. The black church was the one institution in America the federal government could not touch without political consequences. Black drug lords figured this out by the 1970s and started running operations out of storefront churches, abandoned chapels, and the basements of Sunday morning preachers' relatives. The FBI did not start systematically wiretapping locations called church until the late 1990s. Until then, billions of dollars in drug money was stored in places called the church without federal interference. Number 10, mayor. We've reached the top 10. In 1985, a 23-year-old named Demetrius Big Meech Flannery walked into a Detroit nightclub called Watts Club Mozambique. The bouncer did not ask for ID. 3 men at the bar nodded as he passed. The DJ changed the song. He was not famous yet. The Black Mafia family was still 5 years away from becoming a billion-dollar empire. But everybody in that room knew one thing about Big Meech. He was the mayor. In Black Gangster code, the word mayor meant the boss of a specific block, neighborhood, or city. The word came from Detroit in the 1970s and spread nationally during the crack era. When the FBI heard wiretap conversations about seeing the mayor or getting permission from the mayor, they thought dealers were trying to corrupt politicians. They wasted years investigating actual elected officials. They sent agents to interview black mayors of small towns across the South, thinking they had cracked a corruption ring. The real mayors were 25-year-olds with corners. The real corruption was happening in barbershops and after-hours clubs, not in city halls. By the time the FBI figured out what mayor meant, the crack era was almost over. Number 9, ghost work. In 1990, the IRS audited a chain of 14 car washes across Atlanta owned by a man named Anthony Tank Whitfield. The car washes generated $12 million in annual revenue, all cash, mostly $20 bills. Tank had no criminal record. He paid taxes on every dollar. He employed 47 people. The IRS couldn't find anything wrong. What they couldn't see was that the car washes were only doing about $400,000 of actual washing per year. The other $11.6 million came from the cocaine business Tank was running through the same locations. That was ghost work, money laundering so sophisticated it generated real receipts, real employees, real tax returns, but had almost no real source. By the 1980s, black drug lords were laundering through barbershops, car washes, auto detailing shops, soul food restaurants, and clothing stores. The businesses generated real cash receipts, but most of the cash came from drugs. The IRS spent the entire 1990s trying to crack ghost work operations. They caught a few. The rest are still operating today, now selling weed legally in states where it is legalized, using the exact same playbook. Number 8, family reunion. In 1991, on a hot Saturday afternoon in a public park in Brooklyn, the heads of 4 major drug organizations sat in folding chairs eating barbecue, while 200 of their relatives celebrated a Williams family reunion around them. The Williams family reunion had been happening every August in that park for 35 years. The FBI knew about it. They had photographs of it from the air. What they didn't know is that the 4 men in folding chairs, surrounded by children, grandmothers, second cousins, and aunts, had just settled a territory dispute that would have triggered a war that killed dozens of people in the months that followed. Family reunion meant a major drug summit between multiple crews. The meetings happened at real family reunions, hidden in plain sight. Hundreds of relatives, real cooking, real children running around, and 3 or 4 drug lords in folding chairs working out $1 million deal in 45 minutes. The FBI couldn't infiltrate family reunions. They'd stick out instantly. There's no way to plant a white agent at a Williams family barbecue. There's no way to plant a wire on a 7-year-old playing tag. By 1995, the most important business in the black drug trade was being conducted at family functions, while the federal government watched helplessly from drones overhead. Number 7, Sunday dinner. This is the darkest entry on the list. In 1987, a Newark drug lord named Akbar Ak Mohammed invited a young lieutenant named Tyrone Davis to Sunday dinner at his mother's house on Frelinghuysen Avenue. Tyrone never made it. 3 hours before dinner, Tyrone was shot 8 times in his car outside his girlfriend's apartment in East Orange. Coming to Sunday dinner meant a hit was being arranged. The Sunday dinner reference came from the tradition of family meals after church, but in the code, the person being invited was the one who would never come home. The invitation was the death sentence. The phrase circulated on wiretap lines for at least 15 years before federal prosecutors realized what it meant. The FBI captured dozens of Sunday dinner conversations on wiretaps in the 1980s and the 1990s. They could not prosecute the murders because they could not prove Sunday dinner meant anything other than dinner. Hundreds of people died at Sunday dinners they never attended. Their families thought they had been killed in random street violence. They were actually executed on a schedule. With prior notice given on a phone line, federal agents were actively recording. The code did not just hide the crime, it scheduled it. Number 6, library. In 1984, federal agents in Philadelphia spent 4 months watching the Free Library of Philadelphia branch on Cottman Avenue. They had wiretap evidence that a major distributor was using the library as a meeting point. They watched senior citizens borrow books. They watched college students study. They watched a janitor empty trash cans every evening at 8:15. Nothing happened. The actual stash house, containing 60 kilos of cocaine and $1.4 million in cash, was the apartment directly across the street from the library. The dealers picked the location specifically because the FBI would focus on the public building. Library meant a stash house where the books, meaning the kilos, were kept. The brilliance was the misdirection. Federal agents looking for the library were looking for an actual library. Some black drug lords in the 1980s deliberately rented apartments next door to public libraries because the surveillance attention always went the wrong way. By the time the agents in Philadelphia realized they were watching the wrong building, the entire operation had moved to a different library on the other side of the city. Number 5, schoolboy. We're in the top 5. In 1983, a 14-year-old kid named Richard Wersher Jr., white, blonde, blue-eyed, walked into a Detroit house on Hampshire Street and was introduced to one of the biggest black drug suppliers in the Midwest. The supplier looked at Richard and said one word to his lieutenant, Schoolboy. That kid became famous as White Boy Rick. By age 16, Richard was being fronted multiple kilos by adult black dealers. He was running his own crew. He was driving a Mercedes. He was also working as a federal informant, though even his FBI handlers did not know how deep he had gotten. Schoolboy was the black gangster word for a young dealer being trained by an older boss. The schoolboy carried product, watched corners, ran errands, and learned the business. After 2 or 3 years, the schoolboy graduated to lieutenant. After 5 or 6 years, the schoolboy became a boss. The FBI for decades thought schoolboy conversations were about actual school children. They were partially right. Most of the schoolboys were 12 to 16 years old. The most famous one was White Boy Rick, but there were thousands like him across the country. Most schoolboys are dead now. The ones who survived are in their late 50s. Some run legitimate businesses. Some are still in federal prison. White Boy Rick was released in 2017 after 32 years. Number 4, doctor. In 1986, the FBI raided 11 doctors' offices across the Bronx in a single morning. They had wiretap evidence that doctors were involved in a major crack cocaine operation. They expected to arrest licensed medical professionals. What they found in 10 of those offices were confused dentists, family physicians, and pediatricians who had no idea why federal agents were ransacking their filing cabinets. The 11th raid hit an actual operation. The doctor they arrested was a 22-year-old named Reggie Brown with no medical training. He was the best crack cook in the South Bronx. The word doctor meant the cook, the specialist who turned cocaine powder into crack. Cooking crack required precision, the right amount of baking soda, the right water temperature, the right timing on the stove. A bad cook could ruin a $20,000 kilo. So crews had specialists. They called them doctors. The FBI heard the word doctor thousands of times on the 1980s wiretaps. They assumed dealers were talking about corrupt medical professionals helping them. They investigated hundreds of actual licensed doctors and ruined dozens of careers. The real cooks were uneducated 19-year-olds with a stove and a Pyrex bowl. Number 3, Mother's Day. This is the word that brought down Frank Lucas. In 1975, a federal informant named Leslie Ike Atkinson was talking on a recorded line in Bangkok, Thailand. He was Frank Lucas's overseas supplier. He had been turned by the DEA after his arrest in Asia. The DEA had agents listening to every word. They were trying to catch Frank Lucas in the act of receiving a shipment. Ike said one phrase that broke the case. Mother's Day is coming. Make sure the birds are ready. DEA agents in New York immediately understood that a major shipment was incoming on the 1st of the next month. They set up surveillance and they got Frank Lucas on tape, coordinating the receipt. Mother's Day was the 1st of every month, the biggest sales day of the month in the black drug trade. Welfare checks, Social Security checks, and disability checks all hit on the 1st. Crews called this Mother's Day because most of the customers were single mothers, spending their checks on crack and heroin. The FBI and the DEA had no idea why the phrase Mother's Day is coming generated such intense logistical conversation in the middle of June or August or December. By the time they figured out the code, the crack era was already winding down, but they got Frank Lucas first. Frank Lucas was sentenced to 70 years in federal prison in 1976. He served 5 years and got out by giving up dozens of corrupt NYPD officers. The word Mother's Day cost him his empire. Number 2, airport. In 1982, federal agents staked out JFK Airport, LaGuardia Airport, and Newark International Airport for a coordinated 6-week surveillance operation. They had wiretap evidence of a major black drug ring running everything through the airport. They photographed thousands of passengers. They followed dozens of suspicious travelers. They built case files on a former baggage handler at JFK. They never found anything. The actual operation, the airport they were looking for, was a 5th-floor apartment in a building on Vice Avenue in the Bronx. That's where pure cocaine was being cut with baking soda, baby laxative, and vitamin B12 to multiply its volume before being sold on the streets. Airport meant the cutting location because that's where flights, meaning your shipments, get processed before going out to their destinations. Pure cocaine was too strong and too valuable to sell directly. It had to be cut and diluted to multiply its volume before retail sales. The location where this happened was called the airport. Some operations had multiple airports. Some moved the airport weekly to avoid surveillance. The FBI spent years staking out actual airports. The real airports were apartments in the Bronx, warehouses in East Detroit, and basements in West Philly. By the time they figured out the code, the entire crack era had built its infrastructure under their noses. Number 1, tomorrow. And the word at number 1, the code that brought down a generation, and the one we said you never hear an old black man say the same way again. Tomorrow. In 1991, a 28-year-old federal informant in Detroit named Robert Rob Hayes recorded over 200 hours of wiretap conversations with a major drug supplier named Curtis Kurt Anderson. In every single conversation, Kurt promised that something would be handled tomorrow. In 200 hours of tape, tomorrow was used 312 times. The federal prosecutors could not use a single one of those instances in court. When someone said we'll handle it tomorrow, it never meant the literal next day. It was a stalling tactic, a delay signal, a threat, a promise, or a betrayal, depending on context, depending on tone, depending on who was speaking and who was listening. When a dealer told a federal informant that they'll handle it tomorrow, the informant left the meeting believing the deal was on. Then nothing happened. No bust, no evidence. The dealer had said the magic word, and the entire operation evaporated into hot air. When a hitman said we'll handle him tomorrow, it meant the victim was already dead. They were just clearing the logistics. When a wholesaler said pay me tomorrow, it meant you had until sunset before he sent his shooters to your apartment. The FBI captured the word tomorrow in over 100,000 wiretap conversations across 30 years of the war on drugs. They could never prove what tomorrow meant in any single conversation. Convictions fell apart. Prosecutors gave up entire cases. Federal judges refused warrants based on the word. By the time the crack era ended in the mid-1990s, tomorrow had built billion-dollar empires and buried thousands of bodies. The DEA still had not cracked it. Today, when an older black man tells you we'll handle it tomorrow, and his eyes go cold for just half a second, pay attention. Because tomorrow has always meant something more than tomorrow. And for the men who used it right, tomorrow never came for their enemies. 20 words, 40 years, billions of dollars in product moved, thousands of bodies buried, hundreds of federal cases collapsed. The FBI couldn't crack any of them. Most of these words have faded now. Gen Z doesn't know them. The dealers who used them are dead, in federal prison, or writing memoirs. The ones still alive don't talk about it. But for 40 years, an entire underground language ran circles around the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world, and the dealers won. If you made it to the end of this video, you're one of that few. Hit subscribe. Next week, we're covering the 15 black women who ran drug empires the FBI didn't even know existed. See you then.